All right. We got some new faces tonight. That's awesome. We got some new people joining us. I like that. We'll get you caught up. If you haven't been here, don't worry. We'll make sure you get caught up as we go through this tonight. But just to start, so you know, obviously with X-Men, each week we're goaling towards the idea of finding something that you can get better in. I'll get to it in a second, but I think there's a lot of application in this series that we're doing, giving you the opportunity to be able to grow in some way or another. In general, again, just to restate, if men get better, families get better, churches get better, communities get better, culture gets better. That's our plan for all of this. So we're going to continue to talk through. We've been looking at a letter that was written to Titus from Paul, and it has tons of wisdom, especially for us in the culture we're in. It actually stems around this idea that Titus was left again in the island of Crete to grow the church and to strengthen it. And this is kind of some of the setup for what we're going into here. Titus 1, 12 through 13, Paul says this, about the island of Crete, even one of their own men, a prophet from Crete, has said about them, the people of Crete are all liars, cruel animals, and lazy gluttons. This is true, so reprimand them sternly to make them strong in the faith. He says, Crete's awesome. Here's the problem with Crete. There's a culture problem in Crete. Everyone there is, they're like animals, right? They're not following after anything that aligns with our principles as being Jesus followers. So if you're going to lead the church there, here's the problem you're going to have. The culture is massively different than the church needs to be. He says you're going to have to teach the women, teach the men, teach the young men, teach the older men, right? Teach the younger women, teach the older women how to try to follow after God because it's going to be so different than the culture. He says, if you do this, right, Titus 2:8, teach the truth so that your teaching can't be criticized. And he says, then those who oppose us will be ashamed and have nothing bad to say about us. He basically says, if this truth is lived out, right, even those people who don't like you will want to be like you. That's truly what I believe, especially for us as Christian men. That if we actually apply God's principles to our life, people might not like us because of what our faith is. But if we live such a consistent life with the character that God has for us, people would go, I still wish I could be like that guy because he has what I would want to have. He lives the way I would want to live. This is what I've been calling this entire semester. I'm calling it Honorable Men in a Trash Culture, which was applicable then in the island of Crete, and I think applicable now to 2025 in the United States of America. Honorable men in a trash culture. He says this to Titus. Here's what I want older men to be like. And when I say this, older men, it doesn't just mean an old man. It means somebody who is farther along. And that can also mean in the faith. You might be only in your 30s, right? But you might actually have been a believer like for 10, 15 years. There could be guys who are showing up who are older than you or showing up and you brought your friend along, right? And they're the same age as you. But in all reality, you're the older man because you've been in this longer and you have wisdom to be able to share. And the goal also, it doesn't really matter who we are. Like obviously my nephew Landon has been coming to a lot of these and he's just like in his teens, right? But the reality is all of us are going to goal towards the idea of being an older man, right? Like if we read older man, it shouldn't be like, that's not for me. It's more like, how do I get there? Even if I know I'm farther away maybe than somebody else, the goal would still be to get there. Here's what he says about these older men. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. 6 different things that he marks out. He says an older man should have, and this is going to make them look so different than the rest of the culture. My hope is that for each of you, you can get better at least at one of these. Maybe you can't get better at all 6, but could you at least get better at one by the time we get done with these 6 different weeks we get together? Now, before we jump in, we're going to lock in once again. We're doing this together. I'm asking you questions. You're going to say yes if you want to answer yes. This is going to get your brain jogged into actually forward momentum. You're not sitting and just listening, right? We're learning and we're participating. You ready? Yes. Did God make you a man?
Yes.
Did you come to get better?
Yes.
Are you willing to do the work?
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Now, here's the list of things that we're going to look at, okay? We started at the middle. Sober-minded, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, sound in love, sound in steadfastness. The last 2 weeks we covered sound in love and sound in faith and sound in love. Today we're going to cover sound in steadfastness. Then we're going to wrap right back around and we're going to finish out from the top down for these next few weeks. But today we're going to talk about this. An honorable man is sound in steadfastness. Sound, all three of these last steps, simply means made of one thing, made strong, made consistent, stable enough to be built on in each of these areas. So we talked about having that stable, consistent faith, that stable, consistent love, and then tonight, that stable, consistent steadfastness. Now, we don't use the word steadfast very often in our culture anymore. It used to be a much more prevalent word. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when I talk about being steadfast or having steadfastness, the word that's used in the Bible, in the original Greek, is hupamone. And what it means is a combination of patience, constancy, and endurance. Hupamone, steadfast, patience, constancy, and endurance. Here's what I liked. On Blue Letter Bible, if you ever want to study anything, there's this website called Blue Letter Bible, and you can literally read like all the original Greek. It's all for free. We live in the craziest time ever to be able to learn the Bible. And in this, when they talked about the definition, another way that it could be explained is this is like in their notes. It says in the New Testament, the characteristics, this is like their definition. In the New Testament, the characteristics of a man who is not swerved from his deliberate purpose and his loyalty to faith and piety by even the greatest trials and sufferings. They said that's what it would look like in the Bible. If you want to say, like, what does this word mean as it's used? The characteristics of a man who is not swerved from his deliberate purpose and his loyalty to faith and piety by even the greatest trials and sufferings. Here's my definition for a working definition, okay? A common amalgam. Steadfast means patient endurance. Patient endurance. Does that make sense? Those two things put together pretty much cover it as we go through it. He says mature men are meant to be steadfast, having that characteristic of patient endurance. And throughout the entirety of the New Testament, right? This is one of the most encouraged traits by Paul and the writers to the churches. Because the faith that we have as Jesus followers, if you have a relationship with him, right? It's yes, but not yet. Like you have a relationship with Jesus, but all of us have to continue in this world until we come to the day that we move into eternity. So all throughout God's word, over and over again, this concept of in the New Testament, you're going to have this persistent, patient endurance that's going to carry you through is taught over and over again. Let me read this in Hebrews 10, 35 through 37. Check this one out. So do not throw away this confident trust in the Lord. Remember the great reward it brings to you. Patient endurance is what you need now. So like these are people who already have Jesus. He goes, patient endurance is what you need now so that you will continue to do God's will. It continues. Then you will receive all that he has promised, for in just a little while, the coming one will come and not delay. He says, Jesus is coming back soon, right? Until that day comes, what you need right now to continue along is this patient endurance. It's the exact same word, steadfastness. Patient endurance is what you need if you're going to make it to the end of this life, right? Like if you're not going to just flare out, burn out, and then lose your faith, if you're going to actually make it to the end, he says, you're going to have this patience to get you there. But there are two major forces that come as enemies to attack steadfastness. Two major forces that will test and will try your steadfastness as a man. The first is our culture. It's fitting that when he talked to, Titus in Crete, one of the problems with having a steadfast heart is that the culture will attack and try to tear down our own steadfastness. This has been the case throughout history, that culture has been against those who have a steadfast faith, but I do want to address the fact that it might feel weird for you, especially if you're, say, like maybe like 40 or older. This is why. We sit in an interesting place in our country where for a season, and it was pretty long, we kind of had like another version of Christendom in our country where Christianity was seen as a positive. In fact, Aaron Renn, he wrote this article called The Three Worlds of Evangelicalism. And what he was talking about is how we've seen a transition in our culture that no other cultures have ever seen, really changing so fast in such a short period of time. And he says this is one of the reasons why people have a hard time considering how to live out their faith now, especially if maybe they are like 50, 60, 70-year-old as a Christian. Because he says we've experienced three different worlds just in our lifetime. Here's what he says about the three worlds of evangelicalism. He says that there used to be this thing called positive world. And in positive world, which was pre-1994, usually being a Christian actually was kind of like thumbs up. Like you were usually someone who was like a trustworthy person. Like pre-1994, if your family was like a church-going family, it was usually kind of seen as like a positive thing. Like you're probably a good person, probably good influence in the community, right? And in positive world, you being a Christian, it didn't really cost you anything. In fact, a lot of people even pretended to be Christians in positive world. They would go to church and they would attend church, not because they actually believed it, but just because it was in positive world. It was beneficial. But he said, what then happened is we shifted into neutral world. And between 1994 and 2014, it switched. And instead of it being positive world, where it was generally considered as a good thing, Christianity became irrelevant. It was mostly ignorable, right? It was like tolerated, like, like just like anything else. I guess, like it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of, Christianity is just not even necessary, right? Like we don't really care about it. But then what happened is from 2014 on, the culture shifted to what we call negative world. And now in this world that we live in, Christianity is considered problematic to our culture. It's considered destructive to our culture. In fact, to some, they would even say Christianity is immoral. Christianity is immoral because it doesn't line up with what our culture says or the highest dictates. Things like just, the idea of complete tolerance or the idea that everything is equal, right? There can't be better or worse ideologies because that would imply some sort of standards, right? There can't be true truth or anything like this. It has to be relative. And now we live in this culture now of negative world where honestly, today, saying out loud, you're a Christian, usually is going to cost you something. It's usually actually a negative in many workplaces, in many environments. Kind of coming out of the closet as one of those Christians is like, oh, well, I don't know if you want to say that out loud, right? Like that could get you kind of in some trouble. This can feel weird, like I said, especially if you're an older gentleman, because this movement happens so fast. And you could wonder if something went wrong. Like, what happened? What went wrong? And I get that. Like, that's why people are like, can't we just go back, right, to how it was? But we really can't, because what you're experiencing, what you had experienced, was what was weird. Negative world is what has always existed throughout history. Like, Jesus literally said this to his disciples 2,000 years ago before he left. He says, if the world hates you, remember it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you're no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. He's like, this is how the majority of Christians are always going to live. The culture is going to dislike your standards, dislike the character you try to live by, right? Dislike those things when you say there's right or wrong or standards or good or bad. And he says, that's completely normal. I chose you to be different than the world, so it's going to hate you. We don't belong to it. Now, this can be hard though. Because as we seek to become honorable men, to follow God, right, we have to face the disagreements of culture. We have to face the disregard of culture. Sometimes we even have to face outright attacks from our culture coming against us. And then we have to decide if we actually are going to stand steadfast in front of those. 2 Corinthians 6, 4 through 8. This is Paul talking about how we would live as he's encouraging the Corinthian church. He says, in everything we do, we show that we are true ministers of God. We patiently endure troubles and hardships and calamities of every kind. Patiently endure, same word. We've been beaten. We've been put in prison, faced angry mobs, worked to exhaustion, endured sleepless nights, and gone without food. We prove ourselves by our purity, our understanding, our patience, our kindness, by the Holy Spirit within us, and by our sincere love. We faithfully preach the truth. God's power is working in us. We use the weapons of righteousness in the right hand for attack and the left hand for defense. This is what I wanted you to see right here. We serve God whether people honor us or despise us, whether they slander us or they praise us. We are honest, but they call us imposters. I like this because he says we faced plenty of troubles from our culture, right? We've been beaten for our faith. We've been imprisoned by our government because of our faith. We faced angry mobs. We've been left to starve by our communities. And he says, so what do we do in response to that? When they treat us that way, how do we respond, right? He says, we just serve God whether people honor us or despise us. Do you catch the power of that? What he's saying is this. My actions are not shaped by my culture's reactions. I just do what's right. And it doesn't really matter whether culture honors me and pats me on the back or whether culture despises me and says that like, oh, you're a bigot, you're a whatever. He's like, it doesn't matter. Whatever culture I go to, he says, I just do what's right. I serve God. And if people are like, that's great, he's like, cool, that didn't really matter. He says, but if they despise me, I'm like, that's cool too. Because the reality is this, for us, if we're going to be Jesus following men, if we're going to be honorable men, especially in trash cultures, culture shouldn't reshape our convictions. Our convictions should reshape culture. Like our convictions for how we're going to live our life, they're meant to be based on what the Lord has called us to do, not whether culture likes it or not. So whatever our convictions are, culture should not be able to reshape, to remold those things based on what like public opinion is, or based on like what, you know, your extended family says, based on what your workplace says, based on what like your friends say, right? Your culture shouldn't reshape your convictions. Your convictions should reshape your culture. Where you go like, oh, like I'm actually not going to participate in this. Or I'm like, actually, we're not going to be friends, I guess. Because my convictions, those are going to actually reshape the culture that I'm going to live in. What came to my mind with this was the story of Noah. The Lord came to Noah literally at the very beginning, like we don't even know actually how far after creation, but well before any of the other stories of culture that are in the Bible. And he tells Noah that he's going to flood the earth. The earth is completely poisoned, right? It's filled with all this murder and all of this rage. And he's like, hard reset. Like we're going to start this whole thing over and it's just going to be you and it's going to be your family. And we're going to restart the entire population once again. And in Hebrews, they talk all about people of great faith. And the writer of Hebrews literally mentions Noah. He says, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God who warned him about things that had never happened before. This is pretty amazing. It says, by his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. In other words, like the culture didn't agree at all. Do you get that? Like he condemned the whole rest of the world. I was thinking like, that's like the most epic version of this. Like, it's not just like, oh, like some of my friends don't like my faith and they mock it, or like my workplace has. It's like literally it's Noah and then it's everyone else. Everyone else hates Noah's character, right? Like what he's doing, nobody else is on board. It's amazing because Biblical scholars believe that it took Noah 75 years to complete this project. This, of course, is the rendition that they made. Any of you guys been and actually walked through it? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Where's it at in Kentucky? Isn't it? Something like that? Yeah. Really cool. I actually took this picture. This is when it was still being constructed because I thought it was a better version of scale because, of course, those are like work trucks all lined up when they were doing construction on it. Like how gigantic this boat was. It says it took Moses over 75 years to build this boat. And what's really wild is he built it in the middle of like a desert. Can you imagine how much ridicule this guy faced? 75 years of building a boat, and people are like, there's no water. What are you building, right? And this guy had to, for 75 years, have that steadfast spirit in him to be like, I know what God said, and it doesn't matter if everyone tells me I'm crazy. I'm going to keep doing what God told me, even though, right, everyone is telling me I'm wrong. Everyone is telling me I'm foolish. Everyone is telling me that I've lost it, right? Of course, it says he did this by faith, but also he did this by having steadfastness, right? By having this ability to just continue on despite that mockery. It reminds me of this meme. I told my wife that I include more memes in men's, and she's like, why? And I was like, because they're men. I love this meme. I always have. Of course, if you can't see it in the back, there's a giant crowd of people and one man standing facing in the opposite direction, and he's saying, yes, you all are wrong. And I think that's exactly what steadfastness looks like, right? It doesn't matter if it's one person or if it's 100 people or if it's our general culture that we live in, or like Noah, it's literally everyone. It's like, no, you're still wrong. Well, we all agreed, still wrong. Because you have that conviction that your character is set by the Lord. It's not going to be reshaped by the majority of what culture is. The second thing that tries to destroy steadfastness is circumstances. So first is the culture at large. Second is the circumstances around us. The world we live in, of course, is a broken one. Right now, in your life, it might be a great season. You might just be killing it right now. We're like, everything's great. Everything's awesome, okay? But every single believer will face seasons that will try to break down your steadfastness. Jesus, again, he never promised that stuff was going to be easy. Right after he told that line where he's like, hey, culture in general is usually going to hate you, okay? The very next chapter, he says this in John 16:33. I've told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. He says on this earth, he says, here's what it will likely be marked by: trials and sorrows. Trials are things that try you. They put you to the test. They take all that you could give to them. They test your resolve. They test your strength. And sorrows are things that hurt you. They put you into pain. And he says, you will likely face a lot of things that will test every bit of your limit. And then you will face other things that hurt you deeply. And he says, so in light of that, take heart, because I've overcome the world. In other words, be steadfast, because I have you and I'm coming back soon. These circumstances can try to break us if we don't have a patient endurance, if we don't have steadfastness. James, the brother of Jesus, he wrote about this kind of like pointing our eyes to an example. He says, you're going to need this like steadfast, patient endurance if you're going to make it in your faith. And he says this in his letter, James 5:10-11, for examples of patience in suffering, dear brothers and sisters, same word again, patience in suffering, same thing, steadfastness. Dear brothers and sisters, look at the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. We give great honor to those who endure under suffering. Again, same word. For instance, you know about Job, a man of great endurance, steadfastness in a different translation, same thing. You can see how the Lord was kind to him at the end, for the Lord is full of tenderness and mercy. He says you can find examples. He says you can go back through the stories that you've heard before. People like the prophets, right? And the prophets were usually abused and maligned. They would say something that God had said, and everyone would say, we disagree, because they'd be like, turn and follow the Lord, or like, that country is going to destroy you. And they're like, yeah, right, we're not going to do that. That guy's a lunatic, right? And of course it happened, but they never really, like, those prophets who stood up very often, they got like completely misused in their life. They were never actually honored, even though they were a voice for the Lord. Or he says you could look at a guy like Job. Job's story, of course, is one of the most painful stories you read in the Bible, where it says that Job was a rich man. He had everything you could imagine in his life. And in the course of literally less than 1 hour, all of his servants came to respond to him to explain that all of his cattle and all of his money was gone. His business was basically done. His health immediately turned and he began to get sick. And then someone showed up and said, and also all of your children have died in an accident. The man in one day, he woke up, top of the world, right? Everything is great. And he went to bed that night. Everything is broken. Everything is gone. My business, my family, my health, it's all gone. And he says you should look at Job because it literally says this in Job 122. It says, in all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. That's how they described how Job responded. He was in pain, and it says that he actually fell down before the Lord. He says he tore his clothes in dismay. And what Job basically said is he's like, I came into this world naked, and I guess I leave it naked too. Like he's like, everything I had was from the Lord, and I guess the Lord chose to take it away. So he goes, well, blessed be God. I wouldn't have had it if it wasn't for him anyway. And in all of this, Job did not sin and blame God. He didn't turn and believe that God owed him something better, right? Though the circumstances were painful, he realized that everything in his life was a gift from God. And even this didn't mean that God wasn't still good, didn't mean that God wasn't still even good in his life. This is the picture of steadfastness played out to perhaps one of the most extreme situations, but all of us will face these type of circumstances in our life. Steadfastness says this: circumstances shouldn't reshape our character. It should be the opposite. Our character should reshape our circumstances. The character we have, the faith we have, shouldn't be able to be reshaped by the circumstances of our life. The fact that it's a good day or it's a bad day, or it's a good year or it's a bad year, or it's blessings or it's struggles. The character we have should actually reshape the way we would walk through whatever circumstances would come into our life. In steadfastness, there's a trust in the Lord, even when circumstances aren't what you would choose. If we were to be honorable men in a trash culture, right, we have to be able to stand up if this culture does end up taking things from our life. In the Bible, there were plenty of times where people who were Christians lost their businesses, lost their houses, lost their land because of their faith. And they didn't turn their backs on God in those moments because, again, the circumstances didn't reshape their character reshaped their circumstances. So, if you're to be one of these people, a man marked by steadfastness, how in the world would you grow into it? Well, unfortunately, steadfastness in the Bible is not listed as a gift from God that he just gives to us. Like there are things that are said, like they're kind of doled out, like it's just like the Lord builds it in you. Steadfastness is not talked about in that way in the New Testament. It's talked about like a muscle. This is how James puts it again. James 1:2-4 says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance, same word, steadfastness, has a chance to grow. When your faith is tested, your endurance, your steadfastness has this chance to grow. It needs to be something that pushes against it. It needs to be the culture, or it needs to be the circumstances that push against it in order for it to grow. He continues, so let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Endurance, steadfastness. The only way it's grown in our life is by walking through the attacks or the tests that come from culture or come from circumstances. It has to be something that is built through adversity, not something that we can just generate on our own. Most of you guys have probably seen this cycle before, right? You guys seen this one? This is the explanation of what happens in cultures. They'll reference this all the time, that it basically happens consistently through generations of cultures over and over again. So hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. And so the cycle continues around and around. Does that make sense? Right? Hard times, right? It galvanizes men. They build something that's strong and stable. It creates a whole lot, right? Great economy, great world to live in, safety, security. Those good times start building weak men because they don't have to fight for anything. They don't have to hold up anything. And then those weak men create hard times as society collapses once again and the cycle starts over again. This is true in societies. We can see it all throughout time. But also when I was thinking about this is the cycle that every man kind of has to go through on their own journey too. Most of us, and I know some of you didn't have this blessing, and your life started off different, but most of us, we were born into the good times that our strong fathers built for us. Like, our strong fathers built a world around us that was kind of good times. We were born into it. And those good times when we're young on, they create weak men. Like, we don't really have all the skills and all that stuff, right? And then as we try to become men, like we go from boys to men, we usually find ourselves insufficient and weak to be able to actually create that. And that creates some real chaos in our life. That's why so many people have the storyline of like trying to become an adult, and then it's like addictions or like other struggles in their life, or like falling into sin, falling into temptation, all these things, because they're trying to be a man, but they're a weak man, and it just creates lots and lots of hard times. And then the goal, of course, would be for every man to be able to find, how could I actually get strong enough to be able to steer these hard times into something that would actually be good once again? This is the cycle that I think all of us go through. The answer for creating strong men is hard times. Now, whether good or bad, we might very well be in that season of the church, of our culture very soon. So you might just, by osmosis, get to do that. But another way you could say it is this, okay? Franklin Roosevelt is quoted as saying, "A smooth sea never made a great sailor." Does that make sense? He's like, if you wanted to be a great sailor, right? You don't become a great sailor. Let's die. Check. You don't become a great sailor sailing on smooth waters on a lake, right? He's like, the only way you would become a great sailor is if you fought against great waves, if you fought against great adversity. Again, the only thing that would make a man into a strong man, into a steadfast man, would be these hard times. Now, does that mean you should be praying for hard times? I don't think you have to. Like, you could be like, so I'm going to pray for hard times so I can become like a strong man. You could. I don't think you have to. You just will face hard times. Like, you don't have to pray for hard times. They will come into your life. Something will fall apart sooner or later, right? You're going to come up short on money or provision in your life. Someone you love is going to turn their back on you. Someone you love is going to get sick. You are going to lose something in your life sooner than you think is fair. A job, your health. Something is going to come into your life that is going to bring testing. And in that moment, what you have to have is you have to have a mind like Noah or like Job. You have to have a different mindset in your head that when culture or when circumstances come against you as a man and try to push against and break you down, that you realize this is actually an opportunity. It's actually an opportunity. That your steadfastness could grow. Again, I like that verse where he says you'd have this endurance that would have a chance to grow. And he says when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. Let's go back to that Hebrews 10:36, where he was saying if you're going to survive, patient endurance is what you need now so that you will continue to do God's will, and then you will receive all that he has promised. It's neat because he's writing to people who are believers, and he says, you know, you have Jesus, you have faith. The one thing you lack is patient endurance. He says that's what you need if you're going to continue all the way to the end. And James said the exact same thing. He says, when hard times come, let it grow your patient endurance, because he says, if you get steadfastness, he says, you got it all. You're set. You're going to be the one who's going to survive. You're going to be the one who lives out your faith for the rest of your life. Now, just one more quick note on this. Why is this so important? Of course, for your faith, so that you can live out your faith for the rest of your life. Absolutely, that's the case. But also, one more thing, okay? You get to join a long list of great men. Hebrews 12:1 says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us run with endurance. Again, same word, steadfastness. The race that God has set before us. He says there's this great example that's been set before us of great men, people like Noah, people like Job. And he says, and when you run out your version of whatever that is, when culture pushes against you or when circumstances try to crush you, and you run with endurance, you get to join this great cloud of witnesses. But then there's one more piece on this. It's cool because he continues on. And just 11 verses later, he says this. So take a new grip with your tired hands, strengthen your weak knees, mark out a straight path for your feet, so that those who are weak and lame will not fall, but become strong. I think it's cool because he says you get to join this whole cloud of witnesses, but then his last comment is he says, if you're that person who's steadfast, your hands are already tired, but you get another grip. Your legs are already weak, right? But you strengthen them. You mark out a straight path and you continue on it. It's neat because it's not just said that it's going to do something for you. It says those who are weak and lame will not fall, but become strong. It means that your steadfastness will actually bless somebody else. And I think that's exactly it for all of you. Like I said, strong men and strong families. If God's blessed you with a wife, blessed you with children, your steadfastness is going to be something that's absolutely going to be key to them not falling apart someday as well. You're the one who might be able to stand during a season that the culture or the circumstances seek to crush your wife or crush your children, and you're the one who's the steadfast one that holds it together. Or the church. We know our culture dislikes our beliefs. That's only going to become more and more prevalent as we get closer. When Jesus says, like, everything will degrade until I come back. The church is the only thing, and especially strong men in the church, is the only thing holding back culture from rotting. We're the ones who can actually be steadfast and stand up against it. We're the ones who can fight against tyranny and things that come against us. And if men get this steadfast spirit, it's the thing that would bless other people in their family, in their church, in their community as well. An honorable man is found in steadfastness. We live in a trash culture currently, especially for men. Especially for men. You as a man of God should be different. You're meant to be honorable, though our culture is dishonorable. And if you're going to do that, one of the things you have to grow is you have to have this steadfastness in your heart. The faith that God has given you, the truth that you have learned, that you hold on to it despite culture, despite circumstances, that you can stand when others would kneel, and you can be a pillar for others to stand under as well. 3 questions I'd love for you guys to discuss tonight at your table, okay? You can go around. If you run through these progressively, ask these questions to each other, kick around some of the thoughts that are there. And then at the end, I'd also encourage you guys, always ask each other, what can we be praying for? Maybe there's someone who needs help with a job, needs help with a relationship, whatever. Pray for your friends at the table and get back to them. Here's the 3 questions. What examples have you had in your life of a steadfast Christian man? Do you have ones that come to mind? Or is it literally the case that, no? Which, if that's the case, maybe you could be the first one, right? Do you have examples of steadfast Christian men in your life? 2, how do you struggle to be steadfast against culture's pressures? So that's the idea of what culture would push against us, right? That cultural pressure against our belief. Where is it that you struggle? Where is your fight against what culture might say is good or culture might say is normal? And I'm kind of standing in opposition to that. What is it, the struggle that you have to walk in? And then 3rd, what circumstances have you faced that have tested your steadfastness? What has come into your life over the years you've been alive, that it was the thing that it could have broke you and it's tested you, but you walked through it and it developed your steadfastness in your life. I'll leave these up here. Also, I will add them into the group message. Quick post for that or pitch for that. If you haven't joined our group yet, you definitely should on our app. I'm going to put the questions in there. If you can't see this, you can see it inside the app and you can go through it. Can I pray for you really quick? God, thank you so much for this night. Thank you for these men. I pray, Lord, that for the next about 30 minutes, 25 minutes we got left together, I pray, God, that you would help all of us be open in our communication. I understand so many of us, we exist in workplaces where we just do our job and we go home. But I pray, God, that we would actually be willing to have a conversation tonight, maybe to talk for a few minutes through some of these things. I pray, God, that you would direct our communication so that we could grow in this area. And I pray that we would have a steadfast spirit as men. I pray, Jesus, that we would be the ones that others could stand up under when culture or circumstances come to crush us. In Jesus' name we pray.